I travel a lot for work. Mostly small towns, sometimes the outskirts of bigger cities. Always places where hotels are either overpriced or completely booked. Airbnb has been my go-to for years. Cheap, convenient, and usually decent enough for short stays. That's how I ended up at this small guest house on the outskirts of town. The listing looked fine. Nothing special, just a simple one-room place with a kitchenette, a bathroom, and a bed. It wasn't particularly new, but the reviews were solid, clean, quiet, and safe. That's all I needed. The host, a woman named Karen, was polite over messages. She sent me check-in instructions, warned me that cell service could be spotty, and told me to enjoy my stay. Everything seemed normal. But it wasn't. It was late when I arrived, just past 10 p.m. The guest house was in the backyard of a larger home, separated by a wooden fence. It was a little old, the paint peeling in places, but nothing unusual. It looked exactly like the photos, small, cozy, a single porch light glowing in the night. I let myself in with the key from the lockbox. Inside, the air smelled slightly musty, like the place hadn't been aired out in a while. The furniture was outdated but clean. A small wooden table sat against the far wall, and the bed was tucked into a corner, covered with a quilt that looked handmade. I dropped my bag, locked the door behind me, and double-checked the windows. The place felt safe enough. I was exhausted from the drive, so I didn't waste time. I took a quick shower, brushed my teeth, and climbed into bed. That's when I heard the first noise. A soft creak. I froze, my body instantly alert. It wasn't coming from outside. It was inside the guest house. I held my breath, listening. Nothing. I exhaled slowly, telling myself it was just the old wooden floors settling. Maybe the wind shifting the structure slightly. Houses make noises, especially older ones. I turned off the bedside lamp and forced myself to relax. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I don't know what time I finally dozed off, but at some point, I must have fallen asleep. Then, sometime deep in the night, I woke up. I wasn't sure why at first. My heart was pounding, though, and I had that weird sense of awareness, like my body knew something was wrong before my brain could process it. The room was dark, except for the dim glow of the porch light filtering through the curtains. Then I heard it again. A soft creak. My stomach twisted. It was coming from the closet. I stared at the closed closet door, my breath shallow. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination playing tricks on me. Then another sound. A shift, like someone moving inside. A cold wave of fear rolled over me. I was not imagining that. I sat up slowly, my heartbeat thudding in my ears. The room was silent again, but the air felt different, charged, heavy. I had two choices: check the closet or leave. I should have left, but I didn't. I slid out of bed as quietly as possible, my bare feet barely making a sound on the wooden floor. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself to move. Step by step, I crossed the room. The closet door was closed, just a simple wooden panel with a round brass handle. Nothing unusual. I reached out, paused. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me not to open it. But I had to. I grabbed the handle and turned it slowly. The latch clicked. I pulled the door open. At first, I didn't see anything. Just darkness. The closet was small, empty except for a few extra blankets stacked on a shelf. Then my eyes adjusted, and I saw him. A man was curled up in the corner, knees to his chest, wedged between the blankets and the wall. He wasn't sleeping. He wasn't unconscious. He was awake, and he was staring right at me. My mind couldn't process it at first. My brain refused to accept what I was seeing. He didn't move, didn't blink, just stared. He was in his 40s, maybe 50s. Thin, dirty. His skin was pale, his eyes sunken. His clothes were wrinkled and stained. I was frozen, every muscle locked. Then, without a word, he started to smile. Not a normal smile. A slow, creeping grin that stretched too wide, his teeth yellow and uneven. My body reacted before my brain did. I slammed the closet door shut and bolted for the front door. My hands fumbled with the lock, shaking so badly I could barely turn it. Behind me, I heard movement. He was getting out. I ripped the door open and ran. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. I yanked the door open, jumped inside, and slammed it shut, locking it instantly. My hands were trembling so hard I could barely get my keys into the ignition. I turned the car on and flipped on the headlights, aiming them at the guest house. The front door was still open, but the man wasn't there. I scanned the yard, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The place was silent. Empty. Where did he go? My brain was racing, trying to make sense of it. Had he been hiding there the whole time? How long had he been in that closet? I grabbed my phone, my fingers fumbling as I called 911. A dispatcher answered. I need help, I stammered. There's a man. He was in my Airbnb. He was hiding in the closet. I don't know where he is now. They asked for the address. I gave it to them as best as I could, my voice shaking. The dispatcher told me to stay in my car and wait for officers to arrive. I kept my eyes locked on the guest house, every shadow suddenly looking like a person. Then, in the corner of my vision, I saw movement. Someone was standing near the fence, watching me. I couldn't make out his face, but I knew it was him. He stood there for what felt like forever. Then, slowly, he turned and disappeared into the trees. The police arrived 10 minutes later, but by then, the man was gone. They searched the property, found no signs of forced entry, no indication of how he had gotten in. The host arrived after I called her. She was horrified. "He's not supposed to be here," she kept saying. I don't know how this happened. Eventually, the police pieced it together. The man was her ex-boyfriend. They had broken up months ago, and she thought he had left town. But he hadn't. He had been living in the guest house, hiding, and I had been sleeping just feet away from him, completely unaware. I didn't stay to hear more. I packed my things and left that night, driving until exhaustion forced me to pull into a well-lit gas station parking lot to rest. I never used Airbnb again. I booked the Airbnb because I wanted peace. It was a small guest house on the edge of a coastal town, perched on a hillside with a view of the ocean. It wasn't a big tourist spot, just a quiet fishing village with a few restaurants, a grocery store, and a long stretch of beach where the waves rolled in slow and steady. Exactly what I needed. The Airbnb listing described it as a secluded beachside retreat, and the photos made it look simple but comfortable. White walls, big windows, a porch with a chair facing the sea. Nothing fancy, but that was the appeal. The host, Linda, had good reviews. She wasn't one of those overly chatty hosts who wanted to check in every hour. Just a few polite messages confirming my arrival. She gave me the check-in instructions the morning of my trip and said, "Let me know if you need anything. Enjoy the peace and quiet." That was the plan. I got into town around 3 p.m., following the GPS down winding roads that grew narrower and more isolated the closer I got to the house. The last stretch was a dirt path that cut through thick trees, finally opening up to a clearing with the little house standing alone, its front porch overlooking the ocean. There were no neighbors. Just the wind, the sound of the tide, and the occasional seagull. Perfect. I found the key in the lockbox, just as Linda said. The house smelled like salt and old wood, like it had been sitting empty for a while but wasn't unclean. A bit of dust on the windowsills, but everything else seemed fine. The first thing I did after setting my bag down was step out onto the porch. The air was crisp, tinged with salt, and the waves stretched endlessly toward the horizon. I took a deep breath. This is exactly what I needed. For the rest of the evening, I just relaxed, unpacked my bag, made a simple dinner, and sat outside as the sun set, listening to the waves. No distractions, no noise, just peace. Until the next day. I woke up early, made coffee, and took a slow walk down to the beach. The shoreline was empty, no tourists, no locals, just miles of untouched sand. I spent the morning reading on the porch. Around noon, I went back down to the beach for another walk. That's when I saw him. A man, maybe late 40s or early 50s, walking along the shoreline in the distance. I barely noticed him at first. He was just there, moving at a slow, steady pace. He wasn't carrying anything, no towel, no bag, no fishing gear. Just walking. I kept walking in the opposite direction, figuring he was a local or another Airbnb guest from somewhere nearby. It wasn't until I turned back toward the house that I noticed something strange. He had stopped walking. He was standing still now, facing me. He wasn't close, maybe 100 yards away, but he was just standing there, staring. I felt a small unease in my stomach, but brushed it off. Maybe he was just resting. Maybe he wasn't even looking at me, just gazing toward the water. I headed back to the house, glancing over my shoulder once. He was still there. That evening, after dinner, I sat on the porch watching the sky turn dark. The ocean was quiet, barely more than a whisper against the shore. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement on the path leading up from the beach. It was him. He was walking slowly toward the house. A strange feeling crawled up my spine. What is he doing here? There were no other houses nearby, no public paths leading this way. I forced myself to stay calm, watching as he approached. When he got close enough, he raised a hand in a small, casual wave. I didn't wave back. "Evening," he said, stopping a few feet from the porch. His voice was raspy, like he had spent years smoking or yelling over loud machinery. He had tanned skin, sun-creased at the corners of his eyes, and short, graying hair. He was wearing old cargo shorts and a loose t-shirt, both of them a little too big for his frame. I didn't know what to say. This wasn't a situation I had planned for, some stranger walking up to the Airbnb. "Hey," I said cautiously. "You enjoying the place, my name?" he asked. The unease I had felt before slammed into me like a wave. I never told him my name. I froze for a second, trying to process it. He didn't have a phone in his hand. No way to have just looked up my profile or booking information. I forced a small, stiff smile. "Yeah, it's nice." "Thought so," he said, his face blank. I didn't know what to say. The silence stretched between us, too long, too uncomfortable. Finally, I forced myself to ask, "Do you live around here?" "Used to," he said simply. "Been here a long time." That didn't answer my question. I nodded slowly, shifting in my chair, hoping he'd take the hint and leave. But he didn't. He just stood there, too still, watching me. Then he gave a small nod, like he had come to some decision, and turned back toward the beach. I exhaled slowly as he walked away. How did he know my name? I locked all the doors that night. The next morning, I didn't go down to the beach. I didn't even leave the house. I spent the day inside, pretending to read, pretending everything was normal. But my mind wouldn't let it go. I checked my Airbnb messages. Linda never mentioned a caretaker or a neighbor. There were no welcome notes in the house, no indication of anyone else being involved. So how the hell did he know who I was? By the time evening rolled around, my nerves were raw. The sun dipped low, and the air turned cool. I sat by the window, staring at the path from the beach. I didn't want to admit it, but I was waiting. And then, as the last light faded, he appeared again. This time, he didn't stop at the path. He came closer. I stood up, my heart hammering. He walked right up to the porch, stopping at the bottom of the steps. This time, he didn't smile. "You should leave," he said quietly. My skin crawled. "Why?" He didn't answer. He just stared at me, his face unreadable. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound, every creak of the wooden house made my pulse spike. I kept imagining the front door creaking open, footsteps in the dark. By morning, I had made my decision. I packed my bag, locked the house, and left. I never told the host what happened. I didn't leave a review. A week later, out of curiosity, I searched for the listing again. It was gone. I needed a break. Work had been crushing me for months, and I hadn't had a real vacation in over a year. I wanted something quiet, somewhere remote, away from traffic, emails, and the constant hum of the city. That's how I ended up booking a small Airbnb cabin deep in the woods of northern Washington. The listing described it as a secluded retreat, perfect for relaxation. The photos showed a simple one-bedroom cabin surrounded by towering pines, with a small wooden deck and a fire pit. The host had great reviews, and everyone mentioned how peaceful the place was. That's exactly what I needed. I booked it for 5 nights. The drive took longer than expected. My GPS kept losing signal, and the last 10 miles were down a winding dirt road with no signs of civilization. By the time I finally pulled up to the cabin, the sun was starting to dip below the trees. It looked just like the pictures. A small, single-story wooden cabin with a sloped roof, a tiny porch, and a fire pit in the yard. Beyond the clearing, the forest stretched in every direction. No neighbors, no roads, just trees. I got out, stretched my legs, and grabbed the keys from the lockbox by the door. Inside, the cabin was simple but cozy. A main room with a kitchenette, a couch, and a small table. The bedroom was just big enough for a queen-sized bed, and the bathroom was small but clean. I locked the door, made a quick dinner, and spent the evening reading on the couch. Silence. Absolute peace. No cars. No sirens. Just the wind moving through the trees. I slept like a rock. The next morning was crisp and cool. I made coffee, sat on the porch, and just listened to the quiet. By noon, I had gone for a short hike, taken some pictures, and started to actually feel relaxed for the first time in months. Then, someone knocked on the door. It was so unexpected that I froze for a second. Who the hell would be out here? I walked over and looked through the small window next to the door. A man stood on the porch. Mid-40s, tall, a little scruffy. He wore dirty jeans, a worn-out work vest, and scuffed boots. He saw me looking and smiled. Not a friendly smile, just a smile. I cracked the door, keeping the screen door latched. "Can I help you?" "Hey there," he said, his voice casual. "I'm here to check the plumbing." I stared at him. "What?" "The owner sent me," he said, shifting his weight slightly. "Said there was a problem with the pipes." I hadn't reported anything. Nothing was broken. I glanced at his hands. No toolbox. No equipment. Just standing there, empty-handed, smiling. "I think you have the wrong place," I said. He didn't move. Didn't even blink. "Nah, this is the place. Owner sent me." I was starting to feel uneasy. Something wasn't right. I pulled out my phone. "Let me check with her." His smile dropped. "No need," he said quickly. "She probably just forgot to tell you." I didn't answer. I just stepped back and shut the door. Locked it. I sent a message to my host. "Hi, someone is here saying you sent them to check the plumbing." "Did you?" A minute passed. Then another. I kept watching him through the window. He just stood there, waiting. Then, without another word, he turned and walked off the porch, heading into the trees. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. "Host, no. I didn't send anyone. Stay inside and lock the doors. I'll call the police." My stomach dropped. I quickly checked all the locks, then peered outside. The man was gone. I kept checking the windows for the next hour. Nothing. No movement in the trees. No sound. Then, around 3 p.m., my host sent another message. "The police checked the area but didn't find anyone. If you feel uncomfortable, I can refund you for the rest of the trip." I hesitated. It had been weird, but the guy was gone, right? Maybe it was just some local trying to scam me. I decided to stay. That night, I kept the lights off and double-checked the locks before going to bed. I barely slept. The next day, I tried to shake it off. I told myself it was just a random creep trying to make a few bucks. I forced myself to go for another hike, trying to enjoy the quiet again. By evening, I was feeling better. I made dinner, poured a glass of wine, and sat on the porch as the sun set behind the trees. Then, just as I was about to go inside, I heard it. Footsteps. Somewhere in the woods. Slow. Deliberate. I held my breath, listening. Silence. I grabbed my flashlight, shined it into the trees. Nothing. Just branches shifting in the breeze. I went inside and locked the door. That night, I barely slept again. The next morning, I was exhausted. I decided to leave a day early. I started packing up my things, trying to shake the feeling of being watched. Then I saw it. The small window in the kitchen. It was open. I hadn't opened it. I knew I hadn't. A wave of panic rushed through me. Had someone been inside? Was someone still inside? I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and slowly checked every room. Empty. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. I sent a message to my host. "I think someone got into the cabin last night. I'm leaving early." She didn't respond right away. I grabbed my bags, threw them in my car, and got inside. Then my phone buzzed. "Host, that man came back, didn't he?" I froze. "Me? Why would you say that?" "Host, because this isn't the first time." I didn't ask anything else. I just started my car and drove. I never heard back from the host again. I left a review warning others, but when I checked a few weeks later, the listing was gone. To this day, I don't know who that man was, or what he really wanted. I've used Airbnb countless times before, never had a bad experience. I always check the reviews, verify the host, and make sure the place looks legitimate. This time was no different. I had booked a small, rustic cabin on the edge of a national park for a 3-day solo retreat. The listing was well reviewed, over 20 positive ratings, all saying the host was responsive, the cabin was clean, and the location was perfect for hiking and getting away from the city. That was exactly what I needed. The host's name was Linda. She had messaged me the day before check-in, confirming my arrival time and giving me clear instructions. She sounded friendly, even added a little, "Let me know if you need anything at all." I had no reason to suspect anything was wrong. The drive out was peaceful, long stretches of quiet roads, pine trees swaying on either side. The further I got from the main highway, the more isolated it felt. Exactly what I was looking for, just me, the woods, and some time to clear my head. I found the cabin with no trouble. It was a simple wooden structure, small but charming, nestled between thick trees. There was a small porch, a single rocking chair outside, and a tiny gravel path leading from the dirt road to the front door. As per Linda's instructions, I found the key in the lockbox near the door. Inside, the place was cozy, just one main room with a bed, a kitchenette, and a small table. There was also a bathroom tucked in the back. Everything was clean, just as described. I set my bags down, took a deep breath, and smiled. So far, so good. Linda messaged me again after I checked in. "Hope you got in okay. Let me know if you need anything." I replied with a quick, "Everything looks great, thanks," and set my phone down. I spent the rest of the evening unwinding. Cooked a quick meal, read a book by the dim light of the bedside lamp, and finally turned in early. The first thing I noticed when I woke up was the silence. I've stayed in rural Airbnbs before, and usually you hear something, birds chirping, wind rustling the trees, distant sounds of nature. But here, nothing. I brushed it off. Maybe the cabin was just well insulated, or maybe I had slept too deeply to hear anything. I made breakfast, went outside to enjoy the crisp morning air, then decided to text Linda about the heater. It wasn't broken, but it seemed weaker than expected, and the temperature had dropped overnight. I sent the message. No reply. Not a big deal. Maybe she was busy. I decided to go for a hike, following one of the trails that started just a few hundred yards from the cabin. I was gone for a few hours, and by the time I got back, I still hadn't heard from Linda. I checked the Airbnb app. My message was still marked as sent, but not read. Weird. I woke up early, determined to make the most of my last full day. But when I checked my phone again, I noticed something strange. My previous messages to Linda? Gone. Not unread. Not even marked as sent. Just missing. I opened Airbnb and went to my reservation details. Linda's profile picture was missing. Her name was still there, but when I clicked on it, error. User not found. Panic settled in my stomach. I checked the listing. Gone. It wasn't like it was marked as unavailable or temporarily hidden. It just didn't exist anymore. I tried calling the number she had given me in our first conversation. Disconnected. I sat there on the bed, heart racing. What the hell was going on? I had checked in normally. The lockbox was there, the key worked, the cabin was real. But now, it was like Linda never existed. I needed to clear my head. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe she had deactivated her account. Maybe Airbnb had removed her listing for some reason. I opened my laptop and searched the address. Nothing. It wasn't listed under Airbnb anymore, which I expected. But even outside of Airbnb, on Google, rental sites, real estate listings, there was no mention of this cabin. It was like it had been wiped off the internet. I checked the guest book on the table. One of those little notebooks hosts leave for visitors to write messages. It was empty. 20 positive reviews online, but not a single handwritten note from a previous guest? That's when I noticed something else. There were no personal touches. No decorations, no books on the shelves, no little details that made a place feel lived in. Even the kitchen cabinets were stocked with the same brand of canned goods, perfectly lined up like they'd never been touched. I had a horrifying thought. Was this even her house? I decided I needed to leave. I started packing up my things, forcing myself to stay calm. Then I heard a sound outside. A car engine. I walked to the window and peered through the curtain. A dark SUV had pulled up. The driver didn't get out. They just sat there, watching. I stood frozen for what felt like forever. Then slowly, the SUV backed up, turned around, and drove away. That was it. I grabbed my bags, threw them in my car, and left. I didn't care if I had already paid for the night. I checked into a motel an hour away and called Airbnb customer support. I explained everything. The disappearing host, the deleted listing, the strange car. They put me on hold for a long time. Finally, they said, "We have no record of that listing ever existing." I hung up. I went back through my emails. My confirmation email was still there. Proof that I had booked the place. Proof that it had been real. But when I clicked the link to the listing, error 404, page not found. I still don't know what happened. I don't know who Linda was, if that was even her real name. I don't know why the listing disappeared or who was in that SUV. But I do know one thing. I will never book an Airbnb alone again. I had always been a cautious traveler. Before booking any Airbnb, I read every review, scrutinized the pictures, and made sure the place had a history of satisfied guests. When my best friend Mark and I planned a weekend getaway to a city we'd never visited, I followed the same careful process. The listing we chose was a modern 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet residential neighborhood, just a short drive from the city center. The host, a woman named Erica, had a solid 5-star rating and multiple reviews praising her communication and cleanliness. The pictures looked great: bright, spacious rooms, sleek furniture, and a well-stocked kitchen. Best of all, the price was reasonable. Mark and I agreed it was the perfect choice. We booked the apartment for 3 nights. Erica was responsive, sending check-in instructions the night before we arrived. The key was in a lockbox by the front door, and she assured us the place was ready. We arrived late Friday afternoon, excited to drop our bags and start exploring. The building was an older but well-maintained brick complex with a small gated entrance. It had a welcoming feel, quiet, tree-lined streets, and a few families walking their dogs. We let ourselves in and immediately felt at home. The apartment was just like the photos, clean, stylish, and well-lit. The living room had a large gray couch facing a mounted TV, and the open kitchen had everything we needed. Down the hall were 2 bedrooms and a shared bathroom. Mark tossed his bag on the couch and stretched. "This place is solid," he said. "Way better than that last Airbnb we stayed in." I nodded. It felt comfortable. Safe. I chose the bedroom on the left, and Mark took the one on the right. Both rooms had queen-sized beds, simple but tasteful decor, and large windows that let in plenty of natural light. We spent the first night out in the city: dinner, drinks, and some sightseeing. By the time we got back, we were exhausted. Mark crashed immediately, and I wasn't far behind. The next morning, I woke up groggy but well-rested. Mark was still asleep, so I wandered into the kitchen to make coffee. As I filled the kettle, something caught my eye. The door to Mark's room was slightly ajar. That wasn't odd in itself, but what made me pause was the fact that I could see the bed through the gap, and it was slept in. Mark was in my room. I peeked inside, expecting to find him passed out in there, but the bed was empty. I frowned. Maybe he had gotten up early and gone for a walk. But then why would his bed look like it had been used by someone else? The sheets were slightly wrinkled, the pillows slightly dented. Not in a way that suggested someone just sat on it. It looked like someone had slept there for an entire night. I checked my phone. No messages from Mark. Feeling uneasy, I went back to my room and shook him awake. "Dude," I said, "were you in the other bedroom last night?" Mark groaned and rubbed his eyes. "No." "Why?" I hesitated. The bed in there looks slept in. That woke him up. He sat up, frowning. "You sure?" "Yeah. Come look." We walked to the second bedroom, and Mark inspected the bed. He ran a hand over the sheets, then looked at me. "This is weird. You didn't touch it." "No." Mark shrugged. Maybe the host didn't change the sheets before we got here? That seemed possible. It was gross, but not necessarily alarming. I decided to message Erica. Me. "Hey, just a quick question. Was anyone staying in the second bedroom before us? The bed looks like someone used it." She responded almost instantly. "Erica, nope. I cleaned everything myself. You guys are the first guests this week." That made my stomach tighten. I showed the message to Mark. He scratched the back of his head. "Maybe you're overthinking it. It could have been made weirdly, or we just didn't notice it last night." I wanted to believe that, but a nagging feeling in my gut told me something was off. We shook it off and went about our day. By the time we got back, we were tired and ready to crash. I was brushing my teeth when I heard Mark's voice from the hallway. Dude." I stepped out of the bathroom, toothbrush still in my mouth. "What?" Mark was standing outside the second bedroom, staring at the floor. I followed his gaze and felt my blood run cold. A pair of men's shoes sat neatly beside the bed. Neither of us had noticed them before. They weren't ours. Mark backed up slowly. "Tell me you saw those earlier." I swallowed hard. I didn't. We stared at them in silence. Black sneakers, well-worn, laces tied neatly. They looked like someone had just taken them off. Mark exhaled sharply. "Okay, either we're losing it, or someone else is in this apartment." I forced myself to stay calm. "Let's check the closets." We searched the entire apartment, under the beds, in the bathroom, even in the kitchen cabinets. Nothing. No signs of anyone. But those shoes. I picked them up. They weren't dusty or forgotten. They were recently worn. "Dude," Mark muttered. What if someone never left? The thought made my skin crawl. I grabbed my phone and messaged Erica. Me. Hey, I know this is weird, but are you sure no one else has access to this place? Her response took longer this time. Erica. Only me. And you guys. Why? I didn't reply. I wasn't sure how to explain it. That night, I barely slept. Every small noise set me on edge. At some point, I must have dozed off, because I woke up to a soft thud. It came from the hallway. I froze. Another thud. Closer this time. I held my breath. Then I heard it, the creak of the second bedroom door opening. I sat up, heart pounding. Mark's door was closed. I knew he was in his room. Someone else was moving in the apartment. I reached for my phone and turned on the flashlight. I tiptoed to the hallway and aimed the light toward the second bedroom. The door was wide open. The bed, messy, more so than before. And the closet door, slightly open. A sliver of darkness gaped from the crack, just enough to see the outline of a foot. My stomach dropped. Someone was in the closet, watching us. I stumbled back into Mark's room, shaking him awake. Get up, I hissed. We're leaving. Now. He saw my face and didn't argue. We grabbed our bags and bolted. We left the apartment at 3 a.m. and drove straight to a hotel. The next day, I messaged Erica, telling her everything. She was silent for hours. Then she finally replied. Erica, I'm so sorry. You're not the first guests to say something like this. I demanded an explanation, but she never responded again. Later, I checked the listing. It was gone. The worst part, Mark and I never found out who was in that apartment with us, or how long they had been there. I was looking for a weekend getaway, somewhere quiet, isolated, away from city noise. I didn't need luxury, just a place where I could unplug and relax. Scrolling through Airbnb, I found a cabin listing deep in the countryside. The photos showed a modest wooden house surrounded by trees, with a small creek nearby. The description emphasized privacy, peace, and nature. It was cheap, almost too cheap for what it offered, but I didn't think much of it. The host, someone named Elliot, had no profile picture and only a few vague reviews. Some guests mentioned the house being difficult to find, but overall, they praised the seclusion. I booked it for 2 nights. On the day of my trip, I punched the address into Google Maps. It gave me an error. Address not found. That was weird. I checked the Airbnb messages. Elliot had sent coordinates instead of a real street address. He wrote, GPS doesn't always work here. Just follow these coordinates. Don't worry, super easy to find. I should have canceled right then. But I was already packed, and I figured it was just a quirk of the area. So, I started driving. The first few hours were fine. Highways, small towns, normal country roads. But then I reached a fork in the road where my GPS told me to turn onto a dirt path. There were no signs. No street name, just a narrow road cutting into dense woods. I hesitated. The road looked old, almost abandoned. Overgrown bushes brushed against my car as I drove in. After about 15 minutes, I realized something strange. There were no other roads. Not a single driveway, mailbox, or sign of human life. Just trees pressing in on both sides, so thick I couldn't see more than a few feet past them. At one point, I slowed down and checked my phone. No service. I kept driving. After what felt like forever, the road finally opened up into a small clearing. And there it was, a wooden house, just like the pictures. But something felt wrong. For one, the house looked too perfect. The paint wasn't peeling, the windows were spotless, and there wasn't a single leaf or twig on the porch, as if someone had cleaned it minutes ago. I got out of the car and walked around. There were no tire tracks in the dirt, no footprints, yet the place was completely dust-free. I knocked on the door out of habit, even though I had the key from the lockbox. No answer. I stepped inside. The interior was strange. It had furniture, couch, dining table, bed, but nothing personal. No books, no clothes, no decorations. The kitchen had plates and silverware, but no food. The fridge was plugged in, but completely empty. Even hotels feel more lived in than this. The creepiest part? There were no light switches. The lamps turned on with pull chains, and there was no overhead lighting, even in the bathroom. Just a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. I tried to shake the unease off. Maybe it was just a rental property no one actually lived in, but something about the absolute emptiness felt off. Then I noticed the doors. The listing had said one-bedroom cabin, but inside I counted 5 doors. The front door, the bedroom, the bathroom, a door in the hallway, and one more in the kitchen, leading to where? The hallway door was locked. No key. The kitchen door opened to a staircase leading down. There was nothing in the Airbnb description about a basement. I didn't like that. I closed the door and decided not to go down there. That evening, I tried to relax. I made some instant noodles and sat on the porch. The silence was unnerving. No cars, no people, just the sound of trees rustling in the wind. Then I heard it. A sound coming from inside the house. A thump. Not a creak, not the house settling. A solid, deliberate thump, like something falling over. I froze. It had come from the hallway, near the locked door. I held my breath, listening. Nothing else. Maybe something fell in the closet? Maybe a shelf tipped over? I decided not to check. Instead, I locked my bedroom door and went to sleep. The next morning, I woke up early. Something felt off again, though I couldn't explain why. I made coffee and walked around the house. Then I noticed the smoke detector. It was positioned directly above the bed. I'm usually not paranoid about that stuff, but something about it bothered me. I grabbed a chair, stood up, and looked closer. There was no blinking light, just a tiny black lens. It wasn't a smoke detector. It was a camera. I felt sick. I immediately covered it with a towel. Then I checked the bathroom, another one above the mirror. My heart started racing. Someone was watching me. And suddenly, the empty, unlived-in feeling of the house made sense. This wasn't a vacation rental. It was a trap. I needed to leave. I grabbed my bags and went to the front door. Locked. I didn't lock it. I tried again. It wouldn't budge. A sound came from behind me. The basement door was open. It had been closed last night. I was sure of it. My stomach dropped. Someone was inside the house. I grabbed my phone. Still no service. Then I heard footsteps coming up the basement stairs. I ran. I sprinted to the bedroom and locked the door. My only exit was the window. Outside, my car was still there, but the driver's door was open. Someone had been inside it. I didn't care. I climbed out the window, ran barefoot across the gravel, and jumped into the car. As I sped off, I looked in the rearview mirror. A man stood in the doorway of the house, just watching me leave. I drove until I got service and called the police. When they arrived, the house was empty. No furniture. Nothing. Like no one had ever been there. The Airbnb listing was deleted. When I tried to message the host, I got an error. User not found. To this day, I have no idea who was watching me, or how many others never made it out. I never used Airbnb again. I don't consider myself paranoid. I've traveled alone plenty of times, stayed in hotels, hostels, and Airbnbs without issue. I don't check under beds or in closets before I sleep. I've never worried about ghosts, break-ins, or hidden cameras. But this trip changed that. I was in a mid-sized city for work and decided to book an Airbnb instead of a hotel. I figured I'd get more space for my money, maybe even a little kitchen to cook in. I was only staying 3 nights. The listing was an attic apartment, a cozy, newly renovated space with a private entrance in an older house. The host, Mark, had great reviews. People praised how clean the place was, how responsive he was, and how it looked exactly like the photos. The pictures showed a bright, modern attic conversion with white walls, a skylight, and sloped ceilings. Small, but perfect for one person. I checked in late, around 9 p.m., after a long drive. Mark wasn't there to greet me, but he sent me detailed instructions. The entrance was on the side of the house. An old wooden staircase led up to a separate door. There was a keypad lock, and I typed in the code he sent. The door clicked open. Inside, everything looked just like the photos. Clean. Minimal. There was a tiny living space with a couch, a small kitchenette with a mini fridge and microwave, and a bedroom with a queen-sized bed tucked under the sloped ceiling. The bathroom was a small room off to the side, but the door was locked. At first, I assumed it was a mistake, maybe a self-locking door that had swung shut. I jiggled the handle, knocked lightly. Nothing. I messaged Mark. "Hey, just got in. Place looks great, but I think the bathroom door is locked." No response. I wasn't too worried. It was late, and maybe he had gone to bed. I figured I'd wait for his reply in the morning. There was a gas station down the street, so I used the restroom there before coming back. By the time I got into bed, I had almost forgotten about the locked door. Then, at around 2 a.m., I woke up. At first, I didn't know why. I lay there, blinking in the dim light from the street lamp outside, listening. The room was silent except for the low hum of the mini fridge. Then I heard it. A sound from inside the bathroom. A flush. I sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. I must have imagined it. Maybe it was an old pipe making noise. I listened harder. A few seconds later, the sound of running water. Like a sink. I grabbed my phone and checked Mark's messages. Still nothing. I tiptoed to the bathroom door. My heartbeat was hammering in my ears. I pressed my ear against the wood. Silence. I knocked just once. No answer. I turned the knob again, but it was still locked. At that point, every instinct was screaming at me to leave. But I couldn't make sense of it. Maybe the pipes were faulty. Maybe Mark had locked the door by accident, and it was a weird plumbing issue. I needed to sleep. I had work meetings in the morning. I went back to bed and stared at the ceiling for what felt like hours. I didn't hear anything else. Eventually, I fell into an uneasy sleep. In the morning, Mark still hadn't responded. I tried calling him, but it went to voicemail. I had meetings all day, so I decided to deal with it later. I used the restroom at a coffee shop and ignored the growing unease in my stomach. When I got back that evening, I half expected the door to be open. Maybe Mark had come by while I was gone and fixed it, but it was still locked. This time, I pressed my ear against the door again. Silence. I knocked harder. Still nothing. I tried the knob one last time, turning it aggressively, shaking it. Click. It unlocked. The door creaked open an inch. A cold wave of dread washed over me. The bathroom was dark. The only light came from the hallway behind me, casting a faint glow on white tiles. I stood frozen, staring into the blackness. I couldn't bring myself to push the door open any further. I couldn't explain it, but something felt wrong. Every hair on my body was standing up. Then I caught a whiff of something, a faint, stale smell. Like sweat and something else. Something rotten. I slammed the door shut and locked it again. I grabbed my phone and texted Mark, my fingers shaking. "Did you come by?" The bathroom door was unlocked. No response. I felt like I was going crazy. That night, I lay in bed, eyes fixed on the bathroom door, half expecting it to swing open on its own. I barely slept. The next morning, I had one meeting left before checking out. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Maybe the lock was faulty. Maybe Mark just sucked at communication. I forced myself to open the bathroom door. Inside, everything looked normal. A toilet, a sink, a small shower, a folded towel on a rack. The light flickered slightly when I turned it on, but otherwise, nothing was out of place. Still, that stale smell lingered. As I turned to leave, I hesitated. Something caught my eye. The bathroom mirror. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. The glass had streaks, like someone had wiped it with a dirty rag. But there was something else. Smudges. Faint, greasy handprints. Not my handprints. I felt a sharp chill crawl up my spine. I grabbed my things and left without looking back. Later, Mark finally responded. "Sorry for the delay. Not sure about the bathroom door. It shouldn't have been locked. Hope everything was okay." I didn't reply. I checked the listing a week later. It was gone. Completely removed from Airbnb. I don't know what happened in that attic apartment. I don't know who or what had been in that bathroom. But I know one thing. I wasn't alone. I booked the cabin on a whim. It had been a stressful few months at work, and my boyfriend, Adam, suggested we take a weekend away from everything. No emails, no calls, just the two of us. We weren't looking for anything fancy, just a quiet place in the woods where we could relax. The Airbnb listing was perfect. Secluded cabin with modern amenities. No neighbors, no traffic, just nature. The pictures showed a cozy wooden cabin with a large deck, a fire pit, and a small stream running nearby. The reviews were all positive, mostly couples like us saying how peaceful it was. I booked it immediately. When the weekend arrived, we packed up the car with groceries, firewood, and a few board games. It was a 3-hour drive from the city, most of it along empty highways before turning onto a narrow, winding dirt road. About 10 minutes before we reached the cabin, I lost cell service. I expected that, but it still made me uneasy. No service meant no calls, no texts, no way to reach anyone if something went wrong. I pushed the thought aside and focused on the trip. The cabin looked exactly like the pictures, maybe even better. It was a simple, one-bedroom wooden cabin with a large living room, a stone fireplace, and a small but fully equipped kitchen. The bedroom had a king-sized bed with thick blankets, and the bathroom had a modern shower and plenty of towels. The best part was the deck. It stretched out from the living room, overlooking the forest. There were 2 Adirondack chairs, a small table, and a fire pit a few steps away. The air smelled crisp, like pine and damp earth. The host left a welcome note on the kitchen counter. "Hope you enjoy your stay. Make yourselves at home. Firewood is stacked outside, and the grill is ready to use. Let me know if you need anything. Mark." Mark seemed nice. He had responded quickly to all my messages before we arrived. We spent the first evening drinking wine on the deck, listening to the sounds of the forest. No cars, no city noise, just the wind through the trees. It was exactly what we needed. That night, we made dinner, played a board game, and went to bed early. Everything felt perfect, until I woke up. At first, I wasn't sure what woke me. It was completely silent, no wind, no rustling leaves, just an unnatural stillness. Then I heard it, a whisper. It was soft, almost too quiet to hear. I lay there, eyes open in the dark, listening. A second whisper, a slow, deliberate shhhh. I reached over and shook Adam awake. "Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" he mumbled, half asleep. I held my breath. The whisper didn't come again. "Never mind," I whispered back. I stayed awake for another hour, staring at the ceiling, waiting. Nothing. Eventually, I convinced myself it was my imagination and went back to sleep. The next morning, I barely remembered the whisper. The sunlight streaming through the windows made everything feel normal again. We made coffee, ate breakfast on the deck, and went for a long hike. By the time we got back, I had completely forgotten about the sound. That night, we sat outside by the fire pit, wrapped in blankets, drinking whiskey. The sky was clear, and the stars were brighter than I had ever seen them. It was almost midnight when we finally went inside. Adam went straight to the bathroom while I locked up. As I walked through the cabin, turning off lights, I heard it again. A whisper. shhhh. Soft, deliberate, and coming from inside the cabin. I froze, listening. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then, just as I started to convince myself I had imagined it, I heard another whisper. Not words, just breathing, low and quiet, like someone exhaling slowly. I turned toward the sound. It was coming from the ceiling. I looked up. The ceiling was plain wooden beams, except for a small vent near the corner of the living room, about the size of my hand. I stood there, staring at it, my pulse pounding. The whisper had come from inside that vent. Adam walked out of the bathroom. "You okay?" I swallowed hard. I think there's something in the vent." He frowned. "Like an animal?" I hesitated. "I don't know." He grabbed a chair, stood on it, and shined his phone flashlight into the vent. Then he froze. "What?" I asked, heart racing. He didn't say anything, just reached inside and pulled something out. A small Bluetooth speaker. I stared at it, confused. "What the hell?" Adam climbed down, holding the speaker in his hand. It was just sitting in there. A sinking feeling grew in my stomach. Someone had put it there, and someone had played whispers through it. We didn't say anything for a long moment. Then Adam shook his head. "It's probably some prank the owner set up. Like a Halloween thing." I wanted to believe that, but the whispers hadn't been random sounds. They had been directed at us. shhhh. Someone had whispered that on purpose. I turned the speaker over in my hands. There were no buttons. It had to be controlled remotely, which meant someone was close enough to control it. My stomach dropped. I looked at Adam. "We need to leave." He hesitated, then nodded. We packed our bags in 5 minutes. Adam grabbed the speaker and threw it in his backpack. We left the cabin, got in the car, and drove fast. We didn't stop until we reached the nearest town, about 30 minutes away. Only then did Adam pull out his phone and check the Bluetooth settings. A device was still connected. Its name was Listening. We reported everything to Airbnb and the police. Airbnb refunded our stay immediately. The police took our statement, but without proof of who did it, there wasn't much they could do. I messaged the host. No response. The next day, the listing was gone. Deleted. We never got any explanation. We'll never know who was listening to us, or how close they really were. I've always been a fan of budget travel, especially when it comes to booking Airbnbs. I like the idea of staying in someone's home instead of a generic hotel. It feels more personal, more intimate. The listings are often full of character, the host usually friendly and eager to offer insider tips about the town or city. It's cheaper too, which is perfect for a solo traveler like me. This trip was to a small town about 2 hours away, a place known for its antique shops, historic landmarks, and quiet, wooded areas. It was the kind of town where people came for a peaceful getaway, to escape from the hustle and bustle of daily life. I was looking forward to the time alone, away from my regular work routine. The Airbnb I found seemed perfect, a cozy, private room in a family home, with access to a shared kitchen and a peaceful garden out back. The listing promised a serene experience, and from the few photos, it looked charming. Vintage furniture, big windows letting in plenty of light, and an old, welcoming feel. When I arrived, I was greeted by the host, a man in his late 40s named Greg. He seemed friendly enough, offering me a warm handshake and telling me to make myself at home. He gave me the key to the house and mentioned that I'd be staying in the basement room. I thought that was a bit unusual, but the price was right, and the description had seemed fine. I figured it was just one of those quirky old homes with a basement that was converted into a livable space. The house itself was old but well maintained. It had the kind of charm you associate with an older property. Creaky floors, wooden beams, vintage wallpaper, and a slight musty smell that you only get in old houses. The staircase leading to the basement was narrow and winding, with the kind of creak that felt louder than it should be. Greg told me the bathroom was shared with him and his family, but that it was just down the hall. Nothing too strange yet. He showed me down to the basement, where the room was. It was a simple space, nothing special, but not unappealing either. The bed was large, covered with a floral quilt, and there was an old dresser and a small desk near the window. The walls were lined with shelves holding books and knickknacks, and there was a small lamp on the nightstand beside the bed. The window, while small, opened up to a little garden in the backyard. It felt cozy, and I figured it would be a fine place to rest after a long day of wandering around the town. After Greg left, I unpacked my things and settled in. It was around 5 p.m., and I was planning to go out and explore the town, maybe grab dinner before heading back for an early night. But before I could leave, I needed to use the bathroom, so I walked up the stairs to the main floor. That's when things started to feel off. I had already noticed how creaky the floors were when I walked up to the main level, but I brushed it off. But now, as I entered the bathroom and looked in the mirror, I caught a glimpse of something through the corner of my eye. Something in the hallway. It was the faintest movement, just a shadow really, but it made my stomach drop. I told myself it was probably just the light playing tricks on me or a reflection from outside. I finished up in the bathroom and walked back down to the basement, trying to shake the feeling of unease that had settled into my chest. It didn't help that the house seemed unusually quiet, despite there being other people living in it. Greg and his family weren't anywhere to be found. That night, I went out for a walk around the neighborhood to clear my head. It was a quiet evening, and the sun was setting. The air was cool and crisp, and I could hear the distant sounds of birds and wind rustling through the trees. It was the kind of peaceful walk I had been hoping for. I grabbed dinner from a local diner and returned to the house around 8 p.m. When I got back, the house seemed even quieter than before. It was a strange feeling, like everything had been frozen in time. No sounds of television or chatter. Nothing. I walked upstairs to put my dinner in the fridge, but as I passed the living room, I noticed a door slightly ajar at the end of the hall. The faintest glow of light spilled out from the crack. I wasn't sure why, but I felt compelled to peek inside. Maybe it was just curiosity, or maybe it was the strange feeling that had been gnawing at me all day. I approached the door quietly and looked in. The room was dark, except for the light from an old lamp on a desk in the corner. A figure was sitting in the chair, facing away from me, looking out the window. I couldn't see their face, but they seemed to be completely still, like a statue. My heart started racing, and I quickly stepped back, my breath caught in my throat. Who was that? I thought. The house was supposed to be empty except for Greg and his family, and I hadn't seen anyone else around. I decided it was best to just ignore it and pretend I hadn't seen anything. I went back to my room and locked the door, then sat on the bed, feeling the weight of the night pressing on me. I was tired, but sleep wouldn't come. Every creak and groan of the old house made me jump, and I kept imagining I heard someone walking around upstairs. Finally, I managed to drift off, but not for long. Around 2 a.m., I woke up with the feeling that someone was in the room with me. I lay still, listening, straining my ears. The silence was suffocating. Then I heard it. The soft sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate steps, coming from the top of the stairs. My heart began to pound in my chest as I waited, holding my breath. The footsteps paused at the bottom of the stairs, then moved down the hallway. I froze, unable to move. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. The handle turned slowly, and I could hear the faintest creak of the door, as if someone was trying to open it. I had no idea what to do. My phone was charging on the nightstand, but I didn't want to make any noise. The door handle turned again, and the door pushed inward just a crack. I could see a shadow looming in the doorway. My mind raced as I grabbed the first thing I could, a small book from the nightstand, and held it in front of me like a weapon. The shadow stood there, just watching. The silence was deafening. Then, to my horror, I heard a voice, whispered low and barely audible. "Come out. We're waiting for you." I didn't know who they were talking about, but the terror in my chest couldn't be ignored. I had to get out of there. I bolted out of bed, silently as I could, and grabbed my shoes. The door was ajar just enough for me to squeeze through. I crept down the hallway, past the bathroom, and toward the back door. I had just reached the door when I heard the footsteps again, this time closer, right behind me. My pulse quickened, and I scrambled to unlock the door, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I ran out into the night, not caring about anything except putting distance between myself and that house. I didn't stop until I was a block away, breathless and terrified. It wasn't until then that I dared to look back. The house loomed in the distance, dark and silent. No lights were on. No sign of life. I didn't go back inside. I called an Uber to take me to the nearest hotel. I checked out of the Airbnb first thing in the morning, not bothering to explain why. That was my last Airbnb experience. I never went back to that town, and I never stayed in someone's home again. I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was waiting in the shadows that night. To this day, I have no idea who, or what, was in that house, or why they were there. It had been a long day of traveling. Airport delays, crowded terminals, cramped buses, and endless hours on the road. By the time I arrived in the city, I was exhausted. I just wanted to collapse into bed and forget the stress of the journey. I had been looking forward to my stay at the Airbnb I had booked for weeks. It was in a quiet neighborhood, tucked away from the bustle of the downtown area, the perfect place to unwind. The listing had sounded ideal, a cozy little cottage with a garden full of flowers and an old-world charm. The pictures showed a warm, inviting space, complete with a crackling fireplace and soft, comfortable furniture. The reviews were glowing, with people mentioning how peaceful and private the space was. I had even exchanged a few messages with the host, and everything seemed perfectly normal. When I arrived, it was already dark, and the street was quiet, almost eerily so. The air was cool, the faint scent of autumn in the air. I stood outside the house, pulling my suitcase up the short walkway to the front door. The house itself was even more charming than the photos suggested. It had a Victorian-style feel, with ivy climbing up the sides and a wraparound porch. But something about it felt a little off, like a house trying too hard to be picturesque, maybe. I opened the lockbox to retrieve the key, following the instructions the host had sent me. The code worked fine, and inside was the key to the front door. I felt a little sense of relief. Finally, I could rest. I unlocked the door and tried to turn the handle. Nothing. It wouldn't budge. I jiggled it, turned it again. Still no movement. Confused, I pulled out my phone and messaged the host. I had received a message from them earlier confirming that everything was ready, so I thought maybe it was just a fluke. "Hi, I'm at the door, but the key doesn't seem to work. Can you help me?" I stood there, waiting in the dark, feeling the slight chill of the night air. My fingers tapped nervously against the suitcase handle as I waited for a response. Moments passed, then minutes. No reply. I tried the door again, twisting the key, pushing it, pulling it. Nothing. Frustrated, I decided to call the host directly. The phone rang once, twice. Then the call went to voicemail. "Hi, this is Sarah. I'm sorry I can't answer right now. Please leave a message, and I'll get back to you." I left a brief message, hoping for a quick resolution, but the silence that followed only made my unease grow. I stood there for a moment, weighing my options. I didn't want to wait outside for too long, especially with no response. I checked my phone once more. It was already late, almost 9 p.m. and I was beginning to regret my decision to stay in a place so far from the city. The cold began to seep into my bones as I stood there, restless. I noticed something odd. Just above the doorframe, a faint glow caught my attention. I squinted into the dark, but couldn't quite make it out. A small light. No, it wasn't a light. It was the reflection of something shiny, a sliver of metal. My breath caught in my throat. It was the edge of a latch, hidden in the shadows of the porch. I stepped forward, a little confused, and reached up to touch the latch. As I did, I felt a slight resistance, then a soft click. The door, which I had tried to open for several minutes, now opened easily, as though the latch had been holding it closed. My first instinct was to step inside, but as I crossed the threshold, I hesitated. The house smelled stale, a little musty. It was an old, familiar scent, but there was something about it that felt wrong. I stood just inside the doorway, waiting for my eyes to adjust to the dim lighting. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing slightly in the emptiness. "Is anyone here?" No response. The silence was deafening. I took a few tentative steps into the living room, setting my suitcase down by the door. The house looked just like the photos online, cozy, warm, with a little fireplace and vintage furniture. But there was something unsettling about it. The air felt heavy, thick with something I couldn't place. It was almost as if I were intruding on a place that wasn't supposed to be occupied. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I shook it off. It was probably just the exhaustion of travel, I told myself. I was tired, and the unfamiliar setting was making me paranoid. I decided to check the kitchen to see if there was any water. My throat was dry from the journey, and I needed to relax. As I moved toward the kitchen, something caught my eye, a shadow darting across the hallway in my periphery. I froze. It couldn't have been. I turned quickly, but there was nothing there. No sound, no movement. Just the empty house, still and silent. I swallowed hard, trying to push down the unease that had settled in my chest. I walked to the kitchen, feeling my feet echoing on the wooden floors. As I grabbed a glass of water from the sink, I checked my phone again. Still no response from the host. I sent another message, a little more forcefully this time. "I'm in the house, but there's something wrong. Please let me know if I'm in the right place." I set the phone down on the counter and noticed something odd. The door to the basement was cracked open. It was an old-fashioned wooden door, painted a faded green that had chipped and peeled over the years. The stairs leading down were steep, the darkness beyond them almost inviting. I felt a shiver crawl down my spine. I tried to shake it off and went back to the living room, sitting on the couch to try and relax. Minutes passed. I heard nothing but the occasional creak of the old house settling. My eyes were growing heavy, but I fought the urge to sleep. It was far too early to call it a night. I tried to read, but the book felt heavy in my hands. The silence was oppressive. I had never been in such a quiet place. Then my phone buzzed. Finally, the host had responded. "Sorry for the delay. You should have been given access to the house. The key works fine. Enjoy your stay." I read the message again, confused. How could the key work if I was having so much trouble? And what about the latch that I had to unstick myself? I typed a response. The key didn't work at first. The door was stuck, and the basement door is open. Is it okay for me to go in? The host's reply came almost immediately. There shouldn't be anything in the basement. Just enjoy the house. Don't worry. The message seemed dismissive, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. Was the host even at the house, or was she just messaging from elsewhere? I set the phone down again, pacing the living room, trying to calm my nerves. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. They were soft, slow, almost deliberate, but they were coming from inside the house. Someone was walking around upstairs. I stood stock still, listening. The footsteps continued, dragging slightly, like someone dragging their feet across the floor. I stood frozen in place, unable to move, unable to breathe. Was someone else in the house? Had I missed them when I arrived? Then, just as suddenly as they started, the footsteps stopped. A cold shiver ran through me, and without thinking, I grabbed my phone and called the host again. The phone rang once, twice, then went to voicemail. I felt the panic rising in my chest. I couldn't stay in that house any longer. Grabbing my suitcase, I ran out the door, not bothering to lock it behind me. I stood on the porch, my heart pounding in my chest. I tried calling the host again. No answer. The street was quiet. The cool air felt almost comforting against my skin. My mind raced, but all I wanted to do was get as far away from that house as possible. I didn't care about my reservation, the money, or the inconvenience. I had to leave. Something was wrong. Something was off. I checked my phone one last time. The host had sent another message. "You left so soon? Everything was fine. I hope you'll come back sometime." I stared at the message for a long time, unable to comprehend it. Just then, the door creaked open behind me. I turned, heart racing. Standing in the doorway was a figure. An older woman, her eyes wide, her hair tangled and disheveled. Her lips were moving, but no sound came out. I turned and ran.